Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 3-0, and I conclude at 7:48. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I will begin the Intra-Governmental Relations Committee meeting at 7:49, according to my clock. Present are all of council, the mayor, finance director, law director, Chief Wagner, and guests. 2 items on the agenda tonight. I'm going to take them out of order, if that is all right, so that Chief Wagner, I assume, is here for this issue, and let him go about the rest of his evening. So let me make sure I read the name of the legislation. 2021-24 concerns North Olmsted making an agreement with Fairview Park for us providing them dispatch services for police and to contract with prisoners. Now, this legislation is going to be split up into 2 separate pieces of legislation. But Chief, if you wish to address either of those, I'll be happy to listen. So I'm sorry, Mayor, you wanted to speak first?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'll just start off, and I think either the chief or Detective Fiorito is probably the best one to finish. But I had met with Mayor Cooney soon after being elected, and I told him when he gets settled into the job, we could talk about some regionalism ideas. This is one of the ideas that we had talked about via dispatch, seeing as their dispatch was currently done by sergeants or lieutenants or police officers, and that's probably the most expensive way to do it. So there was some turnover. There's obviously a new chief over there at Fairview, and some police officers moving on. So now is a good time to discuss it. As mayors, we decided to turn it over to the chiefs to see if they could figure out a proposal that would work. And they worked together hard on the proposal. And I'll turn it over to the chief, but I do want to also let council know that this is one proposal. Why there's 2 pieces of legislation, it only works in conjunction. It's only going to be a final deal if both pieces of legislation are okayed. And Chief, I'll turn it over to you, and if you want to turn it over to Chuck, whoever wants to talk.
So good evening. We started when we originally did a remodel of the police station back in 2015. We built out our dispatch center for future expansion. So it's the county's really pushing towards having less PSAPs, and when I say PSAPs, a 911 call center, and they're pushing and pushing and pushing for that, and that's come up many times throughout the years. So, you know, many years ago when we did our remodel, we expanded our dispatch where we have 3 consoles, and several years ago we were in talks a little bit with maybe combining with Olmsted Township. Because they were not happy with their dispatch services that they were getting from CCOMs down in Cuyahoga County. And then Fairview Park, like the mayor said, they've been having their dispatch done by lieutenants for the most part. So essentially they're paying a supervisor a pretty good dollar amount to be a dispatcher, and they're not necessarily trained to do emergency communications. You know, all of North Olmsted dispatchers are emergency medical dispatch trained. They do that for a living. They take pride in what they do. The new police chief over in Fairview Park, Chief Shepard, and I have been colleagues our whole careers. So now that they have a new mayor, new police chief, and we have the ability, on top of county pushing towards this, now's a great time. I would consider this a partnership with Fairview Park. I do believe, and Chief Shepard with Fairview Park believes in our dispatch, and we have the capability to do it. So I think we have some figures built in, as you'll see by the contracts. So there is profit built in for the city of North Olmsted, but also if down the road, if county is pushing and pushing, so there's dispatch centers like Chagrin Valley, Southwest Dispatch, which is run by Strongsville. You know, the push is to consolidate, and we feel, looking towards the future when we expand it is that if we don't bring it on ourselves to North Olmsted, we may be pushed to go elsewhere. And I really don't like the thought of that. And that's why us bringing Fairview on is a great idea. And maybe with the intentions of bringing on other area departments in the future as well. So I'm here, happy to answer any questions that you might have. Detective Fiorito is kind of my IT expertise and an expert in the radio communications and the comm center itself. He's also on. I think that we could probably answer most of the questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Chief. I know I have questions, but I'll open it up to others first. Are there those on committee that have questions? Councilwoman Heeman.
Thank you. I don't have a question for the moment, just a statement in that Chief Wagner, I welcome, the fact that if consolidation is going to happen, that we are in the driver's seat of that. I am not a fan of any kind of regionalization necessarily, and it seems, shoved down our throat time and time again. But if we are the folks, being in control of that, actually doing, the dispatching, getting paid to do it, I am in favor of that. Thank you. And I do recall the conversation, on my tour when, the expansion was in process. And so, yes, I think it's a long day coming, but thank you.
Any questions from council? Mr. Limpert.
All right. Can you guys hear me now, everybody? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Apologize that from the previous meeting. All right. No Councilman Limpert notepads there. Apologize. I realized it had re-elect there, which I'm not up for re-election, so sorry about that. Hey, so my comment first is Chief Wagner. So I want to applaud you for coordinating with Fairview here and working. I recall outside of my city role doing consulting at the city of Cleveland almost 15 years ago, and they were pushing for the central dispatch extremely hard at the county level. And was very familiar following the news stories as they looked to try to do the central dispatching at the fire station and expand that out for that. And Ms. Heeman and I both toured the fire station, and the chief laid out those how they weren't using that room right now and how it was built for that in mind. So I just wanted to commend you for continuing down that pursuit and finding a way to collaborate with our closer neighbors to where we can still maintain a solid dispatch. I've had to use it on a number of occasions now with young ones, and I'm just always impressed by the professionalism and quick response that we're able to apply with this setup we have. So I just wanted to say thanks for that, and excited about this opportunity to kind of improve efficiency and save money across the two cities.
Okay, I believe I saw Council President Jones had her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief and Detective Fiorito, for your work on this for our city. Mayor, are the contracts that we're looking at for this partnership with Fairview Park, is it only for the housing of the inmates and for the dispatchers to dispatch for police calls and nothing else?
I'll let Chuck answer that, just to make sure you got everything correct. Chuck, you want to handle it?
Yes. So two parts to that. The prisoner housing is on an as-needed basis only, and Fairview Park rarely keeps prisoners overnight, and those would be the only prisoners that we would be housing. And then we would be billing Fairview a daily rate for those prisoners. Daily rate plus expenses for meals, and if they have to go to the hospital or get medical care, that would all be at Fairview Park expense. On the dispatch side of it, currently we are just looking at dispatching police only. Their fire department is dispatched by Westcom right now, as are most of the other cities that surround us in the West Shore side. We're the only city out here who dispatch police and fire in combination, which works really well for us because most of the time, if it's a fire or a rescue squad type 911 call, police are also dispatched, and the police officers are also always out on the road. So inevitably, police usually arrive at, whether it's a police call or a fire call or a rescue squad call, police usually arrive first. And having that joint dispatch where we do police and fire, dispatchers can dispatch police and fire at the exact same time. There's no delay. Fairview's set up differently. Their police and fire is separated right now, and currently they don't have an interest in bringing their fire department over to our dispatch center, so it's police only. But if we start talking in terms of efficiency, I think they will eventually realize that it's better to have all services dispatched from one location.
Thank you.
Are there any other, I'm sorry, Councilman Kelly.
I thought maybe we were going to discuss these two things separately, but my question is about the prisoners. I believe it was $65 a day. Is that correct for housing the Fairview prisoners? Is that a little bit on the low side, Chief?
It is on the low side. You know, sometimes I believe Parma right now was getting around 100 to 125 a day. You know, there was a big issue with North Royalton and their jail that, you know, the mayor talked about trying to close their jail, and it's still currently open. I believe they have a contract, and we don't quote me, but it's over 100. It's 100, 150 a day per prisoner. You know, like I said before, we're looking at this as a partnership for Fairview. We're not, you know, this is new to us. It's new to them. All the $65 a day, we already have the staffing in place for our prisoners currently. So if somebody gets arrested by Fairview Park, they're going to go back to Fairview Park. If they arrest a shoplifter, they're going to go back to Fairview Park Police Station. They're going to get processed by Fairview Park, and then they're going to be released. If it happens to be a prisoner that they can't release for whatever reason, that's the only time that we will house a prisoner for Fairview Park. So yes, it is on the low side, but we have the staffing. It's not going to cost us any really additional staffing, and any incidentals that are taken on are going to be paid for by Fairview Park on top of it. So we're not going to incur any additional costs for our city. Like I said, it's more of a partnership at this point in time. We do have a profit base built in, but you know, it's more of a first time and being friendly neighbors and working well to make sure this is going to go according to plan.
Mr. Chairman, if I could continue.
Yes, and then Ms. Williamson.
So Chief, you have what, one full-time correction officer and how many part-time?
So right now we have one full-time, one part-time, and actually we kind of have two part-time, but the one part-time really doesn't work at all. He is still on the books, but he really doesn't work for us much. We could bring on an additional part-time that would supplement the full-time, because right now our full-time works Monday through Friday days and handles all the prisoners for court. And then our other part-time, you know, handles like prisoner visitation and so forth, which we really, we've cut down on for COVID reasons. But we could bring on an additional part-time jailer. We do have the funds available as far as our wages go.
And one other question, would you know approximately how many prisoners Fairview may have had in the last year that had to stay overnight?
Chuck, do you have that information in front of you? I know we do have the information. I just don't have it in front of me right now.
Yeah, and I don't have the prisoner information with me.
I could surely get it. It's not near as many as we have. They're not as busy as we are. And but if I don't have it in front of me, Councilman, but I will get you that information.
So
Okay, thank you.
the impetus for combining dispatch with jail is that in Fairview, their supervisors, police officers are their dispatchers, and they are also their jailers. So if they're going to take those supervisors and put them on the road and be policemen again, there's nobody in their building to be a jailer and to watch prisoners. So this is taking on their jailer and prisoners when required for overnight stay is really a benefit for them. And it's the only way that they can justify getting rid of their officers stuck on station all the time.
One other thing, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, my only concern is that if there was a larger number of prisoners that would require your corrections people to handle, would it become a drain on your system or clog up what cells you have? I understand the fact that they don't have corrections officers in Fairview.
I don't expect to house too many for Fairview. Like I said, I don't have that number, and I feel ill prepared because I can't give you the exact number that they housed last year. You know, if we don't have a corrections officer, we also have a supervisor on duty as well to assist in the jail. And that's, you know, how we run it now if we don't have a full-timer or a part-timer working.
Thank you, Chief and Detective. I appreciate your answers. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilwoman Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief or Detective, could you tell me if one of our officers has to transport a defendant to the hospital, if it's a Fairview prisoner, who is making that transport? Will Fairview transport and sit on their own people when they're taken to the hospital? Or will that be on North Olmsted PD to do that?
So if it's a Fairview prisoner, it will be on Fairview, although if the prisoner requires a squad, it will probably be North Olmsted squad, obviously, because it's in our city and it's close. It would take a while. But if it was going to be a Fairview Park prisoner and it didn't require a squad to transport, then Fairview Park would come down and handle that.
So if the prisoner was taken to the hospital by a squad car or an EMS, say, would the Fairview Park officer then go and stay at the hospital with this prisoner until they're done and then transport them back? Or would our officers be sitting in on that prisoner?
Nope, that should be handled by Fairview.
Okay, but if we have to do the transport, will Fairview be paying for our officers' time? I mean, is there some kind of reimbursement for that?
As far as the squad? Because yeah, I think we would have Fairview Park Police handle their prisoner if it was their prisoner. So I would, unless they were requesting mutual aid at that time, you know, until they could get an officer down there. I think it would be a Fairview handling their prisoner. And that's the way the discussion that we've had.
Even if it's a transport from the jail to the hospital?
Yes, we would probably, normally what we do is we don't have an officer ride in the squad unless that prisoner's combative. We would have an officer in a patrol car just follow behind to the hospital. We could, you know, Fairview, we would obviously let them know it was their prisoner and they could pick us up along the way on the transport along the way.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other questions from council? Mr. Schuman.
Chief, just for clarity, so they would be reimbursing us for the squad if the squad is called in to transport a prisoner.
I don't know if that's been brought up, if we would actually bill Fairview Park like we bill for our squads now. That probably we have to talk to the mayor and see how we want to handle that with Fairview, whether we would actually bill Fairview Park for our squad runs.
Okay, maybe we could get some definition on that. Thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Williamson. Councilwoman, we're not hearing your audio. I think your internet service is a little delayed at the moment.
Pardon me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, is it my computer? Could you hear that just now?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead with
anyone
your
hear me?
question best you can.
It's just a comment to say that if we're seeking reimbursements and it is a Fairview Park person, that we perhaps go to Fairview for reimbursement and then let them seek their own reimbursement from that individual, such as we do with our own here. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions or comments from council? So I'll ask my questions, and I don't think I'm asking something that would need to be in some kind of executive session, but Law Director Garreau, I'm perking your ears in case I'm asking something inappropriate, which is, what are our costs to jail somebody? If we're charging 65, what is our cost?
So it depends how long we have to hold them for. We get, part of the Department of Corrections run by the state. They have a lot of requirements on us. Our jails always, we just had an inspection recently, and there's, you're required to have a registered dietitian. A prisoner's supposed to have a registered dietitian diet. So we get all of our prisoner meals from St. John West Shore Hospital. If we house a prisoner for 24 hours and we have to feed them breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we get billed per meal. It's very, I don't know how much it is. It's very, very cheap of what the hospital charges us for a prisoner meal. And that meets the requirements for the being a registered dietitian. And, when they're brought into our jail facility, they're screened on any allergies that they may have, and a whole medical screening process. We have an on-staff doctor that we have with for on-call purposes, to meet the standards that we need to meet for the Department of Corrections. So it all depends on how long we're keeping them. Sometimes we keep prisoners for an hour. Sometimes if we keep them for a full 24 hours, obviously it costs a little bit more because of the prisoner meals. Our correction officer, like I said, works Monday through Friday. We have regularly scheduled part-time hours for our officers, part-time correction officers. So that amount of wages is already built in. So whether we have one prisoner or 5 prisoners, it doesn't cost us any more other than prisoner meals per se. So we almost always have at least one prisoner in our jail all the time anyway. So if we had one of Fairview's or 2 of Fairview's, or we had none of Fairview's, we're still, under the same cost other than the prisoner meals themselves.
So thank you, Chief. I appreciate the concept that it's a marginal cost. We have fixed costs regarding having a jail, and this is a marginal cost to add on Fairview. However, I would still like to try to diagnose with some level of precision as to what our costs are. I don't particularly like the notion of us not splitting those costs equally. It sounds like we should be able to handle that, but and if we're in effect charging Fairview less than we're charging our residents, I'd like to better understand that if we could. I guess my next question would be, in the newspaper coverage on this topic, it indicated we were giving Fairview a discount based on the dispatch services. Not only are these two pieces of separate legislation, I understand Fairview's interest is only if both of these are adopted, but are each of these separate pieces self-funded, so to speak, or is one subsidizing the other? Because the way the article read, it looked like the dispatch was subsidizing the prisoners. Is that the case?
No, so at the rate of $65 a day, that's more than what we would have to pay if we house them for a full 24 hours. The meal cost is, again, I'll just use $15 a day for prisoner meals. Other than that, there are no other costs because we have our correction officer there. I understand what you mean. Like, yes, they should probably cut part of the cost for our correction officers as well. Currently, Fairview Park doesn't employ any correction officers. It's just done by their on-duty supervisor staff, who is also their dispatcher. We've built in a profit, and it's, for dispatch and jail. So is one subsidizing the other? I mean, you can, whichever way. I mean, like I said, we've built in a profit, for that. So whether it's a dispatch profit or a jail profit, but the $65 a day that we would bill Fairview Park, I believe that's profitable as well.
Okay, I believe before I started asking questions, I saw Councilman Limpert raise his hand. Councilman, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Glassburn. And my question was along similar lines to what you were asking. Just in the contract, there's a 3-year period, and it looks like there's some initial startup costs, or initial expenses. I was just curious, what is the impact if this only lasts 3 years? Is that going to be a fixed cost hit to us as far as ramping up the program, or are we still covered from those initial costs to run the program for 3 years?
The initial cost, and Detective Fiorito, if you want to jump in, the initial cost, to go to a multi-jurisdictional CAD computer-aided dispatch, the Motorola radio, the Eventide recorder, which is what records our calls as they come into dispatch, so we can reproduce that if need be. All those costs are upfront start costs are burdened by Fairview Park.
And then, Mr. Glassburn, I could just follow up.
Yes.
Yeah, and so just in general then, so it sounds like from our first 3-year contract perspective, we really aren't taking on any risk of expense, and then there's obviously an opportunity cost of extending that contract forward as a consistent partnership, and pricing and terms will be able to be revisited at 3-year time period as well if it does turn out that prisoner meals escalate, or the dispatch costs increase from a equipment standpoint. Is that accurate?
So that is accurate. The mayor and the police chief from Fairview Park have, like you said, they see this as a partnership also. They stand to gain as much as, as anybody in this. And, we're going to be adding one additional full-time dispatcher, at least 1 or 2 part-time dispatchers. We normally use our part-time dispatchers as a feeding system for our full-time. But also we have right now currently 3 of our full-time dispatchers have 30 years plus of experience, and they can retire at any point in time. So yes, we are adding 1 full-time dispatcher as part of this, but that would, if this Fairview Park dispatch went away after 3 years, would we be overstaffed at that point? I think we would take the position by attrition at that point if we no longer needed it.
Thank you, Mr. Glassburn. One last thing. Yeah, and just a last comment. This is related to expenses, but as it relates to just updates and monitoring of the program, I know we have Board of Control and year management of the process from a safety perspective, but I think it would be valuable as we're starting these new programs or adding a partner onto a program that we have sort of an annual update to council over these 3 years of how this is progressing, and should probably sit outside of just the budget update to see how that's progressing as far as a partnership, and as well any other opportunities to bring on other cities as this evolves.
Any further comments or questions from council? Okay, given that I don't see any, and we are going to wait on the second piece of legislation to be drafted, so we're not impacting timeline. I believe the right course of action would be to hold this in committee for now, and then we will amend this when we have the second piece of legislation. Director Garreau, is that the timeline
Chairman,
you would be looking for?
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
please go ahead.
if I may, if you wish to move this from committee as an amended ordinance so that we only have one subject, the other ordinance can be introduced on Tuesday, and the two will be, and then you can either suspend it and pass them at the same time. They don't have emergency clauses, so the two pieces can kind of ride as one on second reading, one on first reading. If you want to do it that way, that could kind of speed it up a little bit. If you choose to keep it in until I draft another one, you could do it that way too. But if you just make a motion to recommend approval as amended, and the amendment being that you will limit this to dispatch, I will then, you have that amended ordinance, and then on Tuesday, the companion piece can be introduced on first reading, and then you guys can kind of do with it as you like. Probably another way. Up to you.
Okay. I think, Director, the way I would like to approach it is to try to put this on a trajectory for Tuesday, but I'd like to hold this specifically. This is somewhat of a larger policy change. So if we can have the two separate pieces of legislation, we'll amend this one as a vehicle on Tuesday as well. But in terms of information I would like to see a with our fixed costs included, what is our cost for holding the prisoner, if it's 65, if it's less than 65, whatever it is. I would also like to, again, secondly, understand that each of these independently are on good financial footing on their own. It sounds like that's the case, but I'd like to see that better. And then lastly, I had one other question that occurred to me that I forgot to ask, and maybe Chief is best to answer this. So if Fairview Park drops off a person for a minute, is that $65 and then it's another $65 when it's 24 hours and 1 minute, or is it prorated? How does that work?
We've talked about 65 as a whole. So if we take a prisoner in and book them in, they'll be charged $65, and at the end of that 24-hour period, if we still have that prisoner, it'd be an additional 65.
Okay. Is there any other questions after my long rambling? Okay. Seeing none, I will move to hold this in committee for the moment, and we'll revisit this on Tuesday. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Schuman. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. It is held 3-0. All right, Chief, Detectives, thank you for attending. You're
Thank you.
Spared the rest of the evening if you wish to be with your
Thank
family.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll move on to the next topic, 2021-21, which is the new electronic meeting code section that I woefully attempted to introduce in our last meeting, but failed miserably. President Jones, would you like to illuminate us on the virtues of this legislation?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, the Charter Review Commission recommended an amendment to the residents, allowing not just for council, but all of the city's boards and commissions to meet electronically. The measure passed with 82% approval. My legislation that you are looking at tonight creates the section of the code to create the basic rules to be followed for all of our public bodies if council chooses to authorize electronic meetings in accordance with our charter in the future. The legislation in front of you today does not authorize electronic meetings for council or any board or commission. Following the charter, council would need to address that topic at a future in-person meeting. I will say that once we return to chambers, which is a topic for discussion later this evening, I do not intend to invoke the electronic meetings for council unless it is an emergency, as I believe that our council meetings should be in person as much as possible. If a board or commission would like to continue meeting electronically once the state of Ohio's emergency orders expire on May 31st of this year, council would need to take it under consideration. But I'm not opposed to allowing some of our boards and commissions to continue meeting remotely if that makes sense to council. However, if meetings should continue remotely is a topic for another day and is not taken up by the legislation in front of you in any fashion. Finally, the rules that are being proposed tonight I have talked with our director of law, and the idea behind this was to create a broad piece of legislation that would ensure consistency across all of our public bodies in the city. This document is not intended to incorporate every conceivable rule. So each body is allowed to adopt further restrictions for how they meet. So for example, council might put additional requirements in our rules of council versus our planning and design commission, which might choose to handle other things differently. The goal in proposing this legislation and going through it with our law department was to hit on some key principles that I felt would be consistent across the board. It's my hope that anybody given the authorization to meet remotely, including council, would add additional requirements that best suit their body through their own rules and procedure process. I'm happy, and as I'm sure our law director is, to answer questions about the legislation to help your committee and council in its discussion on how to best lay the groundwork for consistent electronic meetings across our municipal government. Thank you.
Thank you. I will start with committee. Are there any comments or questions on the legislation? Councilwoman Heeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got something on page 2, 4E as in Edward. It would be my preference that all participants be in the city of North Olmsted within the city limits and not outside of those city limits. I think that, you know, those are the parameters of our jobs, elected or otherwise. So that's my preference, that, you know, all participants be physically in North Olmsted. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other comments or questions? Committee first. Okay. Rest of council, Councilman Limpert.
Yeah, I just want to kind of reiterate again the point I brought up last meeting. I think that given audio technicalities, which as we've seen can occur on a more than regular basis, you should be able to vote via written statement of yes. I know the law director had some comment about having a vocal yes, especially during committee, and I think even perhaps at council, given an audio technicality, you should be able to still provide a visual reference of yes, as opposed to having to do the dial in and re-record your vote after 5 minutes.
Director Grove.
Thank you. And speaking of audio issues, it sounds like somebody's making a kettle of tea. I don't know if that's me, but I hear this whistling noise every time Councilman Limpert turns on his microphone. But it sounds just like a kettle. or you're in a windstorm, but one or the other. The council is different than the boards and commissions because you're subjected to the roll calls of yeas and nays. Some of the other boards and commissions can do voice votes on a number of things, but council's a little bit different. I tried to get rid of that years ago with a charter amendment and it lost. So you know, that we would change how we do the voting on council and limit the roll call votes for just legislation to be enacted, the motion to enact. That failed. So we're stuck with council having to do the actual verbal yeses and nos. Committee, boards and commissions, you can do whatever you want, but it's a little bit different.
Councilwoman Heeman.
Yeah, hang on, sorry, gotta get the cat out of the way. So I have a question though about that, Mr. Groh. So obviously, you know, an accommodation would be made for a disability, right? That someone, you know, who would have to use sign language could do that. So I understand that you know, in person, but since it's, you know, you have to be on camera is one of the requirements. You do have a visual for that, and you would have a sign language of sorts for that instead of a voice. And or if you were not on camera, then you could perhaps call in and have your voice vote, but you would not be on camera. So I kind of agree with Councilman Limpert that I get the charter portion of that, but it seems restrictive to have to be on camera and voice vote if you have a technical difficulty. And I mean only in that criteria that you were having a technical difficulty. So is there not, other than changing the charter, there's nothing?
Mr. Chair, there really isn't. I mean, if it requires the roll call vote, it requires the roll call of yeas and nays. It doesn't provide for head shaking or thumbs up, thumbs down. And I'm not being, you know, trying to be, you know, cute on that. I know because we've done it here. You know, people would flash a message or whatnot. It doesn't allow for that opportunity. We've you know, in a perfect world, we could do it with just a, you know, some other method that was simpler. I know we're at the crossroads of technology and our other charter provisions, but this just seems to be one of those that you need to be present. You need to be able to communicate. To communicate, you have to communicate verbally in order to be able to cast your vote. It's just kind of my angle on looking at it and what that would mean. See, there's Dwayne right now. I can't hear the whistle, Dwayne. Thank you.
Councilman Limpert, the disclaimer on that was not clear in the visual. No. So, Director, is there perhaps an alternative remedy in this of if somebody is not present for a vote, that they can record their vote later as opposed to completely shutting down the meeting as long as that vote doesn't change the outcome?
Mr. Chair, there probably is. I think our rules, if they used to allow for it. I think they still do. For if you miss a meeting, you can record your vote as long as it doesn't change the outcome, stuff like that. I'm sure we can come up with some other way to accommodate that in the event that, you know, it's not often you get these one vote decisions, you know, where it's based on one vote. But I'm sure we can look at something in the rules that would perhaps give the person an opportunity to vote while also moving the meeting along, you know, where we're not sitting around for 10 minutes waiting for everybody to log back on.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Limpert.
I mean, that's my biggest point with it, right? Let's just keep moving the meeting along in an efficient and effective way. And if it's well understood, let's find ways to do that as opposed to the person having to dial in and go back to a previous piece of vote, et cetera. So that's all I'll say on that one. I know there's other topics, so thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Broussard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Circling back to a suggestion about needing to be present within the city limits for these meetings, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with that. We all have different day jobs. Those of us that do have day jobs, not all of us are retired. We all have different schedules, and one of the unintended benefits of virtual meetings in a pandemic world is our ability to fulfill our obligations virtually anywhere. So for that reason, I'll disagree. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Heeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to point out that my reason for suggesting that we have to be within the city limits is because while yes, we do, and even I still have a day job, Mr. Broussard, I'm not fully retired. We still would have to attend that meeting in person. We still would have to not be traveling for a day job or not be traveling for pleasure. We would be in the city of North Olmsted for any other meeting and be required to be either excused or not. And so I wouldn't have any idea why you would just not be absent, as with any other meeting that, you know, you should be required to attend for your position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Heeman. I will remind folks, let's try to not get too personal with each other on this issue. Are there other comments or questions from council? Okay, I will state that that was the Councilwoman Heeman's concern. Actually, was the only thing that caught my eye. It's not a moral or judgment. It seems to be a consistency issue to me. But that's just my view. It seems like we're going to need to hold this at least to potentially explore a remedy for allowing the vote of folks to occur if it doesn't change the outcome. Council President Jones, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, and I'm completely fine with council further, exploring this further. But I did just want to remind that, so the ordinance that you're considering right now covers all boards and commissions. And some of our boards and commissions do have members on them that are not residents of our city. So I'm not sure. I mean, I would need the law director to, weigh in on that. And again, it doesn't have to be tonight, but that would just be like I was saying, kind of at the top of this meeting, if each board and commission then wanted to drill down farther, for what their requirements would be for their own meetings, and incorporate them, for example, we would incorporate ours through our rules of council and that type of thing. Each board and commission might have a slightly different procedure, and this legislation is more just trying to set a baseline throughout the city to make sure that we're all playing by the same rules for the most part. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council President. If it's more appropriate to do this in the rules of council, I'm more than fine with that personally. Councilwoman Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I do understand the concern, I also have a concern, just a hypothetical. If someone had power going out in their neighborhood, I know at one point my neighborhood was out for almost 7 days at one time. Now, an incident like that right now would prohibit me from participating in a virtual meeting. However, my mother had power, and that's where I stayed in the evenings because it was quite cold in my house. So she doesn't live in North Olmsted. So how would I get around something like that? And maybe not just me personally. What if it was another of our members? I mean, we're all in different areas of the city. And we may have issues that cover this. So I really do believe that there should be some kind of clause in there if this is the will of council to go forward with, having our members present within the city, that we have a clause in there for circumstances that are beyond our control. And in addition, how are we going to verify that everyone is where they're supposed to be? I mean, I know what, Chris, I know what your background looks like, but Lou's in a different room than he normally is, and Paul's in the same area all the time. So I think that, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
I think those are fair points, Councilwoman Williamson. I'll note that Council President Jones and Council Member Heeman has gone to City Hall a number of times due to similar issues, either internet or electricity. Just as an FYI for anyone who's having issues, but points duly taken. As to verification, I have no idea. Are there other comments or questions? Okay. Again, so it sounds like if we were to do a location requirement, that might be best suited for the rules of council, so as to not impact other boards and commissions. Director Garreau, is it, I'm sorry, Council President Jones, is the timeliness of this necessary that we should try to also do this on next Tuesday as well? Or can we allow the law director to ponder this at a time when he does not have eggs or bunnies in his presence?
Mr. Chairman, I think that it would be fine to not have this be covered next week, and we could, look at it a different week coming up.
Okay, it sounds to me then that would be the best course of action. Is there general agreement on that? Seems like it. Okay, in that case, I will move to hold this in. I'm sorry, Director Garreau.
I'm sorry. Just to clarify, so for this piece of legislation, you would like me to look at the question Mr. Limpert raised about some sort of a vote being recorded after the fact to try to speed this up. That was the first question. And is that the only one? Did you want me to also look at the rule issue about the residency or where you are at the time of your participation, or do you just want to hit that one later on with a rule change?
Well, procedurally, I think it sounds like we would like it to be a rule change, but okay. If you wish to explore both topics, I'm sure it's going to come up. So. All right.
Okay, because I mean, it won't. The rule change part won't hold this up. If I can just get you some language, and maybe President Jones and I can kind of talk this through a little bit with Clerk Massarolo. Kind of the three of us have been talking about this, so to try to address Mr. Limpert's concerns, and I can look at some language for the rules as well. But it shouldn't hold this up. The rule change part can be dealt with later, but that could at least get this legislation moving along. So. Okay, I'll take that's just the one issue I'll take a look at. I'll discuss that with the president and the clerk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Garreau. If there are no other comments or questions, I will move to hold this in committee, and we'll revisit this next time in the second week of April. And I'll ask for a second.
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Schuman. All those in favor, aye.
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 3-0 held. And with that, I will conclude the committee at 8:41 p.m.